How do you see generative AI aligning with current business strategies and goals?
No matter how we want to look to this new wave, call it GenAI or AI in general, it will transform all our activities and the way we do business. I think it's important that companies in general try to generate some level of competence in artificial intelligence, including generative AI and non-generative AI, right?
Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining our Quintessence podcast today. Today, we have Alejandro Zarate as our guest. Alejandro is the managing director and global head of data strategy specialties at Marsh, the world's leading insurance broker and risk advisor. He's also a data, technology, and artificial intelligence lecturer at Columbia University School of Professional Studies. Alejandro graduated from MIT with an MSc in Management of Technology, where he concentrated in predictive modeling, analytics, and big data. He also graduated from Carnegie Mellon University's Tepper School of Business with an MBA. Welcome, Alejandro, to our podcast. Very excited to have you today.
Thank you, Arunima. I'm very happy to be here and having this conversation.
Amazing. So, the topic we are going to cover today, Alejandro, is navigating the tides of change. How can CXOs of broker and carrier organizations harness GenAI for breakthrough innovations in 2024? Without further ado, let's get started. My first question to you, Alejandro, is around strategic alignment and investment. A year into the GenAI boom, where are brokers and insurers today in terms of GenAI adoption? How do you see generative AI aligning with current business strategies and goals?
Thank you very much. It's a very good question. Well, first of all, I would like to take one step back and talk a bit about the role of AI and now generative AI. I mean, there has been a lot the last year, probably since ChatGPT was launched and Gen AI came into all these conversation. Let's put it that way, right? But let's remember that AI has existed for a very long time, right? Supervised machine learning has been around for a very long time. Unsupervised machine learning it has been around for a very long time. So clearly it's something that it's part of our lives today. Now, regarding the strategy and regarding the alignment with the industry, right? I would say that, of course, AI as a general purpose technology, and what I mean when a general purpose technology means that it's a kind of technology what will transform all our lives, right? It will transform our productivity and will transform the way to do things. So certainly, no matter how we want to look to this technology, no matter how we want to look to this new wave, call it Gen AI or AI in general, it will transform all our activities, right? And the way we do business. I personally feel that the insurance industry, especially the big players, have been taking the right steps in order to start to incorporate this into their operations. Um, and the benefits will be there, right? At the beginning, as any of these kind of technologies, we will see a lot of impact in terms of productivity, cost saving, time savings, and that's really important. Said that, um, I think it's really important that we keep in mind that tools like ChatGPT can have and make a very big difference. And I think it's really important that organizations start to adopt this and start to embrace these technologies. Otherwise, they will start to fall behind. Good examples of these in the industry, we have Len AI at Marsh, my company, launched in November 2023, in which gives all our brokers and all our colleagues the possibility to put their hands on generative AI in a safe manner, right? So I think that's a great progress, and it's having an impact in productivity. Aon has also announced that they will be launching their own generative AI tools late in 2024. Chubb has also announced different tools they are using. So certainly these technologies will be start to enable and help us to be more productive. In the future, I think we will start to see also how we can use and leverage these technologies to create more value for our clients and to make and to open new business opportunity. But we are not still yet there.
Yeah. That's amazing to hear,
Mhm.
especially when companies like Marsh, who are at forefront of making sure customer experience is perfect out there. It's great to hear everything that you are doing as of today to be at
Mhm.
the forefront of it. That leads me to two questions, Alejandro. One big question as of today is, how do you really measure the return over investment that executives are making for GenAI initiatives? That's
Mhm.
one. And second is, there is always this idea of faster go to market because everyone is doing in the space. Carriers and brokers would want to differentiate themselves and come to the market with such technology sooner than later. So what do you think is a good strategy for businesses? Should they go buy route or build route, where they buy technologies that are built by insurtechs like Quantify out there, in terms of capabilities, or should they rather think of building something in house, or should they take a middle ground where they buy a portion of it and groom it for their business? What is your perspective on that?
Okay, to answer the first part of your question about ROI, right? I think it's really important to keep in mind that the immediate benefits of these kind of technologies, especially we start to use generative AI or any other kind of machine learning, it it will impact a lot productivity. So we will see a lot in terms of time savings. We will see a lot around improving operations, and all those kind of things can start to be measured and can be start to be, let's say, monetized in a way in which we can put a monetary value, right? But I think that will be the first step, right? Try to, especially in terms of time. For example, what I anticipate is that new techniques like retrieval augmented generation will have a tremendous impact in our industry because we are heavily dependent on documents, right? And we have probably 80% of our data is or more is on a structure, right? So that will give us opportunity and will open the door to do other things. A lot of this data today is extracted manually or is processed manually because it's not always about data extraction, but it's really about getting insight from the data. And a lot of these things are done manually today. I think in that sense we will see a lot of benefits and a lot of return on investment, right? Now, trying to answer the second part of your question, what about what should be my strategy? How should it start? Right? I think it's important to understand that these tools need to be embraced. I mean, at least that's my opinion in that sense. I was reading a report by Google, by the way, yesterday. It was published, I think, yesterday. It was written by Andrew McAfee, who was a former MIT professor, and he was saying that in a study made among 14,000 people in 14 countries, they found that 28% of these people were using AI at work. 55% of these people were using unapproved tools, and 40% were using banned tools. So tools they were not approved to use, right? But in the other hand, they say 71%, they say the technology helped them to be more productive, right? So what I mean with this, we need to embrace it because people will want to use it anyway. People will want to use these tools. So we need to give people these tools and we need to start to let them experiment with them, right? So I think that's why I see very positive that big companies give this tool in terms of or instead of trying to like block them from their employees, right? Now, between developing inside or not, I think this is a very important question. I believe that some specific kind of use cases have to be developed internally because the kind of data you are managing, the kind of business questions you are trying to answer, many times require a very deep uh, subject matter expertise that you have only inside your company. right? So in those cases, I think will be very difficult that you can actually have an insurtech solving those problems for you, or probably the time that will take you to get to a point where you can start to get the answers you want, it will take too long.
Mhm.
So in that sense, I think it's important that companies in general try to generate some level of competence in artificial intelligence, including generative AI and non-generative AI, right? Like let's call it classical AI, because also it's important to keep in mind that many of these use cases, many of the use cases we have can be solved with other techniques and will work, and those other techniques may work better than gen AI, right?
Mhm.
Today it can happen to us that we think that gen AI will solve all our problems. Yes, probably will solve many of them, but that doesn't mean that necessarily is the best answer for specific use cases, right? Maybe classical AI can complement with gen AI, and that will be the best way to solve these situation, these use cases, right?
Mhm.
Said that, I think companies, yeah, need to consider having internal teams if they can afford it. Obviously, if they can have the right access to talent to invest and keep teams inside their organizations capable to understand the use cases and to develop and prototype solutions. But in the other hand, also, there will many use cases in which you will have insurtechs with very well established competences and value offerings that makes no sense for you to develop internally, right? I think a great case is what you guys do, right? You do a lot of document processing. That's a use case where you have a really good competence, you know exactly how to do it. So it makes no sense that I try to do internally something that probably in the long term will not create a significant value. But
Mhm.
these are things to evaluate in terms of what to do. I believe that it's more a hybrid approach depending on the use case and depending on the value you want to create and the level of subject matter expertise that will be required to tackle the specific use cases.
That's so well put, Alejandro, because in one response, you were able to educate us on the buy versus build strategy. How do you motivate your organization towards healthy adoption of generative AI coming into businesses? And also, you touched upon the value of specific business needs that need to be known by these innovations that requires carriers and brokers to build capabilities in-house as well, so that you can have the best of both worlds. So well put. You called out a very important point on Gen AI will transform the way we do business at the core. My next question is on this regard. For executives as of today, if they want to choose a starting point, where do they start? How does someone answer that question? Where can executives start?
Well, that will depend a lot on your resources, right? So basically, when you are trying to adopt technology and when you are trying to adopt Gen AI, you basically have three options, right? You can be a taker, in which you can basically use the technology like ChatGPT and just or use this technology through an API. I create your own user interface, right? And leverage the APIs that are available. I'm not talking also not only talking about ChatGPT. I'm talking, for example, Gemini, Google Gemini, or Llama 3, or any other language model that you can leverage. That's your first alternative. I just try to leverage the tool as it exists today, and I try to make as much as we can. And I think that's the ideal starting point for most organizations, right? Because it will prove the value of these technologies. It will help people to understand them, and it will give people the opportunity to experiment with them. So I think it's the very first, let's say, step, and that's how I would start, right? That's how I would recommend people to start. Start just being a taker, right? Make a safe version of ChatGPT available to your people, or make people available a safe version of Gemini that allows you to have control what goes in and what goes out without not being in that 40% of people that are using tools that are not approved by your company, right?
Right.
The
That's
second option you have is to be what they call a shaper, right? Shaper are those users or those companies that will somehow try to shape these models and try to leverage that shaping. And what I mean with this, for example, if you do fine tuning, right? We heard a lot early this year about how can you fine tune any language model, right? And how you can basically add an additional neural network and train it for any specific task, right? Examples in our industry could be claims classification or sentiment analysis. Those are like typical applications, right? In which I have a language model, but I have a defined taxonomy in which I need to classify text or emails. And how I do that, if the model doesn't know my taxonomy, well, you can fine tune the model and you can actually create, use this very, very large language model, train that last layer in your network, and use it for a specific task. So that's when you become a shaper, when you start to leverage and you start to tweak the models a bit in your favor so you can serve specific business cases. Now, the beauty of being a shaper also is that it will allow you to do things that are more difficult with the normal, let's say, taker approach, right? Like I just use the model as out of the box because it will allow you, for example, to start to define or design workflows. It will allow you to answer more specific questions about your business. So it has a lot of advantages in that sense, right? Retrieval augmented generation, which is a technique, for those who haven't heard about it, is a technique that allows you to analyze your documents and to get insight from your documents without really having to put 100% of that document in the language model. Is a good example, right? It's a kind of in the middle, but it's in a way I can start to shape and start to use the model in a bit different way. Fine tuning is, let's say, it could be the ideal case in many situations. And the last option you have is to be a maker, right? Which is what Google is doing, what OpenAI is doing, what Anthropic is doing, Cohere are doing, in which they are actually creating their own models. They are creating their own language models, and they can actually generate the foundational models for their specific use cases. Some of you may remember a few months ago, Bloomberg announced their language model, right? Like they announced Bloomberg GPT. And basically what they did is they created this foundational model. They call it Bloomberg GPT, which was nothing more than a large language model, but only with Bloomberg data, right? Or pretty much Bloomberg data, right? Now, the problem with this is that it's very expensive. You need to have a very solid business case to do this, but it's possible. I mean, I remember I was in a conference in which some of the guys from Bloomberg presented their findings, and I think they were reporting about an investment of about, I think it was $50 million to create this large language model, right? So these are the three approaches you can have. Personally, I think start with the taker approach is the best way. It's very safe and will allow people to start to play and understand these technologies.
Such a beautiful thought, Alejandro. Really appreciate you sharing this with us. That brings me to my last question for the day. You have touched upon some very important topics around adoption. How do executives create that comfort in their teams about artificial intelligence? How can we think about strategies, investments, outcomes, and starting point? My last question to you today is around responsible AI. What are your thoughts on ethics and bias in AI models, and how can companies ensure that they are building or buying these AI technologies that are responsible? Because you today at Marsh are dealing with the largest amount of consumer data. You probably have 60% of the world's data in that statistic.
I don't know.
So having said that, how do you think about responsible AI?
Well, this is a great question. And as we know, AI depends on the data it's trained on, right? We saw when ChatGPT was launched or some other tools were launched, we start to hear about all these hallucinations, right? In which people were getting answers that could be racist or could be extreme, or I mean, all kind of answers, right? And that depends only on the data. Now, another reality is that if you check the literature, and there was a presentation by Andrew Ng I watched a few months ago. He was commenting that today, uh, 99% of papers around AI concentrate on the models, right? They don't really concentrate on the data, and a very small amount, I think less than 1%, really concentrate on the data, right? And in fact, he started to advocate for something called data-centric AI. I think in our industry, this is a very important topic because we have so many decisions to make around uh, who to insure, how you respond to a claim, all that kind of stuff. That is extremely important. That in our data strategy, in our data strategy, we incorporate this concept of data-centric AI, right? And also, what I mean with this, we need to have somehow in the industry, or we need to think about the data sets we use to train our models, and probably that will require to incorporate as part of that strategy to have curated data sets for machine learning. I think we take a very high risk just trying to fine tune a model. Let's say we want to fine tune a language model on data as it is in our masters. We need to curate this data. We need to make sure, and there are many tools around you can use to prepare these training sets in order to make sure that we minimize bias, particularly. Bias will be there anyway. I mean, the data we have is result of human activity, and human activity inherently has bias. But what we can do is we can go one step beyond and really get into understanding that we need to be able to look at our data, be critical about it, make sure that the questions we are trying to answer and are answered in a fair manner. Let's put it that way, right? And that will require a lot of effort in terms of the data strategy and how we generate these training sets for fine tune or supervised machine learning, whatever you want to do. But I think that's a place where we will have to be in the future.
L- Very well put. Thank you so much for this conversation, Alejandro. I hope our listeners enjoyed this conversation as much as I did. Thank you so much for making time for us today. And we look forward to bringing you again some other time onto the podcast because I feel there is so much we could talk about more that has not come out in this podcast. But lovely conversation. Thank you for making time. And we look forward to having you on board again.
Well, thank you for the invitation. It has been an honor to be here. I really enjoyed the conversation, and I will be very happy to come back anytime.
Thank you.
Thank you.